Yes, it is, and welcome back. Wednesday, January 12th, 2022. The French historian Henry Locard wrote that, quote, in brief, the Maoist revolution, and above all the revolution, was the revenge of the ignorant over the educated, the triumph of obscurantism, the meritocracy of our own world turned on its head. The fewer degrees you had, the more power you attained, close quote. This would be why, for instance, Pol Pot and the Maoists of Kampuchea would target people with and seize their reading glasses so that they could not read or think for themselves. Think of it as a wholesale solution to memory holing, as opposed to rewriting everything and updating all that had been written before, which is really a retail problem, even in Oceania. For, as Orwell asked, how could you make appeal to the future when not a trace of you, not even an anonymous word scribbled on a piece of paper, could physically survive? Obscurantism. It's a good word. You don't hear it often. It means the practice of deliberately preventing the facts or full details of something from becoming known. This defines the efforts of the Democratic Party, particularly your president and vice president. No need to memory hole if you have an ignorance of history, or better, you are exquisitely schooled in newspeak, new history. Recall your Milan Kundera for a moment. Quote, the first step in liquidating a people is to erase its memory, destroy its books, its culture, its history, and then have somebody write new books, manufacture a new culture, invent a new history. Before long, the nation will begin to forget what it is and what it was. The world around it will forget even faster, close quote. So, yesterday, President Joe Biden asked, quote, do you want to be on the side of Dr. King or George Wallace? Do you want to be on the side of John Lewis or Bull Connor? Do you want to be on the side of Abraham Lincoln or Jefferson Davis? Close quote. If we want to see the question as rhetorical, we could, because we've been answering it here nearly every day and long before it occurred to Joe Biden. Hell, Joe Biden was palling around with supporters of Bull Connor and defenders of Jefferson Davis in his own party throughout the 1970s, when most of us had already accepted the opposite view, the views of King, the views of Lincoln. And yeah, it was Jefferson Davis those friends and colleagues of Joe Biden were looking to. I'm surprised it's still available. Screen grab it while you can. No doubt it will disappear. But this is a headline from NBC dated 2019. It reads thus exactly, quote, Joe Biden didn't just compromise with segregationists. He fought for their cause in schools, experts say, close quote. As for using race to determine rights and privileges, most of us got the memo in 1963 and from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Today, the movement to use race to determine rights and privileges rests exclusively in the Democratic Party. Find me one Republican who believes otherwise, and find me one Democrat who does not. But of course, we Republicans, according to Joe Biden, are on the side of Bull Connor and Jefferson Davis. The entire revision, memory holing, redacting, reframing, and obscurantism is on the side of Joe Biden and runs deeply throughout its entire party and belief system. It is their worldview, but they try and foist and impute it on to their political opponents. We have it with us, we who know a modicum of history, at least as it used to be taught, which is to say accurately, that the cause of the Confederacy was not just unjust, an effort to preserve and protect a baleful and baneful institution, namely slavery and then Jim Crow. The secessionist and segregationist movements were rebellions against America and her ideals, and most importantly, her founding. Indeed, its supporters said things like the Declaration of Independence didn't proclaim self-evident truths, but self-evident lies. In his famous, or once famous, cornerstone speech, Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, said, quote, the American founding rested upon the assumption of the equality of races. This was an error. It was a sandy foundation, and the government built upon it fell when the storm came and the wind blew. Our new government, the Confederacy, he continued, is founded upon exactly the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the black man, not the word he used, is not equal to the white man. That slavery's subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. This is our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon the great physical, philosophical, and moral truth of the difference between the races, close quote. The more we read and know our history, the more we come to an amazing irony. The rioters among us, those targeting American institutions and statuary, those proclaiming America racist, those claiming 1776 and the founders were all wrong, were all bigots, so much so that the founding needed to be switched from 1776 to 1619. They are in exact common, in exact league, in precise consonance with the very Confederate monuments they are trying to illegally take down. And they are even more so in exact common, in exact league, in precise consonance with the Confederate States of America when they go after, say, Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant and the 54th Regiment Memorial in Boston, as the Black Lives Matter movement and rioters did in 2020. Who is on the side of Lincoln? Those Kamala Harris was raising funds to bail out of jail for rioting against Lincoln, and B, upon the reading of American history given to us by the Confederacy and the segregationists, Uncle Joe resurrects? Why Uncle Joe? Why am I calling him that, the nickname for Joseph Stalin? Well, because Joseph Stalin told H.G. Wells, quote, "Education is a weapon whose effect depends on who holds it in his hands and at whom it is aimed," close quote. Joe Biden has earned the sobriquet. I hope this point is not too subtle. We have had the experience that thought our founding was a lie. It was the Confederate States of America and today's rioters in the BLM and Antifa movements, along with their political and financial supporters, all within the Democratic Party today. We have had the experience that Lincoln and Grant and those who nobly fought under them were evil monsters. It was the Confederate States of America and today's rioters in the BLM and Antifa movements, along with their political and financial supporters, all within the Democratic Party today. We have had the experience that thought our country should treat humans by the basis of their race rather than the basis of their humanity. It was the Confederate States of America and today's rioters in the BLM and Antifa, along with their political and financial supporters, are all within the Democratic Party today. We have had the experience that thought our country should be rebelled against and taken up arm against. It was the Confederate States of America and the rioters in the BLM and Antifa movements, along with their political and financial supporters, all within the Democratic Party today. So shame on them all, starting with Uncle Joe. You know, there were scholars of yore who thought the Declaration of Independence in our Constitution was not meant to include black Americans, just as the BLM says, just as the Democrats today say. There were. They had names. I gave you one, Alexander Stevens. They had other names, Roger B. Taney. He was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court when he wrote that into the Dred Scott decision. Most of us used to think he was wrong. Most of us used to think that was one of the worst decisions in history. Most of us agreed with the dissenting opinions of Benjamin Curtis and John McLean, whose better history than Taney's proved otherwise. Let's do history right here. If you want to view, or if you want the view that America's founding justified slavery, you could read the history. It exists as written by Roger B. Taney and the Confederates. If you want the view that America's founding did not, you could read the dissenting views of Justices Curtis and McLean, the dissents Lincoln favored and used. The history of America we all thought was vindicated after the Civil War. It is the Democrats and the 1619ers and the BLM and the entirety of the left that uses Roger B. Taney's history of our founding, the history used to justify racism. There was a better history, embraced by the dissents mentioned above, embraced by Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, Frederick Douglass, and a lot of others. Abraham Lincoln gave us one of his most famous speeches deconstructing and destroying the Dred Scott decision in a speech that would go on for about 5 times the length of any of my opening monologues. Lincoln put it poetically in part of his speech where he said this, quote, "In the time of our founding, our Declaration of Independence was held sacred by all and thought to include all. But now, to aid in making the bondage of the black man universal and eternal, it is assailed and sneered at and construed and hawked at and torn, till if its framers could rise from their graves, they could not at all recognize it. All the powers of earth seem rapidly combining against the black man. Mammon is after him. Ambition follows, and philosophy follows, and the theology of the day is fast joining the cry. They have him in his prison house. They have searched his person and left no prying instrument with him. One after another they have closed the heavy iron doors upon him, and now they have him, as it were, bolted in with a lock of 100 keys, which can never be unlocked without the concurrence of every key, the keys in the hands of 100 different men, and they scattered to 100 different and distant places, and they stand musing as to what invention in all the dominions of mind and matter can be produced to make the impossibility of his escape more complete than it is," close quote. That departure and running from and away from our founding philosophy, as had been taking place, was embraced by Justice Taney and the Confederacy. It was opposed by Lincoln and Grant and Frederick Douglass, and almost all understanding of American history until about 40 years ago, and by the BLM and Antifa movements today and the Democratic Party today. Even today, as the Emancipation Statue of Abraham Lincoln in Washington, D.C. is up for destruction, we see yet again there are still those who must embrace the cause of freedom and equality by wanting to destroy monuments to those who fought for it against those who did embrace the racial and racist perspectives of humanity and took up arms against the United States to do so. There are no, it now seems, great endorsers of the Dred Scott theory and Confederate philosophy and decisions any greater than Antifa and BLM activists and their supporters today in Uncle Joe's party. I hope that irony is not lost on people, but I fear it is. It is, I believe, a subtle but very important point. Let me put it squarely and unsubtly. There were those who thought our founding was meant not to include blacks. They went to war against America. They wrote decisions like the Dred Scott decision. They formed the KKK. They formed Jim Crow. They formed segregation. They created Bull Connor and Uncle Joe's friends in the Senate. There were more who thought that the founding was meant to and did include blacks. They opposed and dissented in the Dred Scott decision. They went to war against those who went to war against America. They tried to make the KKK illegal. They had names like Lincoln, Curtis, McLean, Grant, and Frederick Douglass. The Antifa and BLM movement embraces the views of the first group, not the second, and they, again, are going to war against America and America's history right now. If I may paraphrase the great Mark Levin, that's right, I said it. The know-nothings of today have not studied the lessons of history, and while invoking it and its worst names are doing so only from the perspective of junk thought and junk education to induce deliberate miseducation. I could quote so much more, but I'll just quote this and ask you to ask our BLM and Antifa Rebs and Uncle Joe, who do they think knows more and better American history when it comes to slavery and Jim Crow in our founding? They or Frederick Douglass? It's like asking who knows more or better history of World War II, Elie Wiesel, Viktor Frankl, and Winston Churchill on one hand, or David Duke and Louis Farrakhan on the other. Douglass, pre-Civil War, pre-Civil Rights Act, called the Constitution, quote, a glorious liberty document, close quote. His words exactly. You hear Democrats say that anymore? No. You do hear us say that. Martin Luther King called the Declaration and the Constitution magnificent. His words, before the Civil Rights Act. When's the last time a Democrat did? No, they're all about changing 1776 to 1619. They're about calling our founding racist and damnable. Don't let Uncle Joe today act as the Uncle Joe of the 1940s, rewriting everything and revising everything. So much George Orwell was compelled to write 1984 in the first place. This American needs no lecture from Uncle Joe about whose side I am on vis-a-vis King or Wallace, Abraham Lincoln or Jefferson Davis. His side's history is Davis's, not Lincoln's. Mine is Lincoln's, not Davis's. I get haters of America, the permanent revolution crowd, the Marxists and neo-know-nothings. Just don't count me among them, as I still think of this place as the last stand on earth, as Ronald Reagan put it, and the last best hope of earth, as Lincoln put it. Destroy it and you destroy everything, everything good. That's what Uncle Joe and Kamala are about, all the while gaslighting the illuminated and the enlightened. Two final small thoughts. If our election system is so corrupt it requires federal seizure, how's come Joe Biden is president, Chuck Schumer is the head of the Senate, and Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House? Were they elected under a corrupt election system, as they're telling us we have? Second, keep your glasses. Maybe just don't wear them in public. For public view, to signal you unite with the state and the party as being dictated with you. You know what will do just fine? The mask. That's what they want you to wear in public. There's no better billboard of fear and illness than that. They don't want you wearing glasses and reading and thinking for yourself. They want you wearing face masks. And you who do this, you are the state's and the party's walking billboards. Once upon a time, we distrusted the state and the single-party monopoly. I can see why. You can't, because education as a weapon has worked on you.